Hey, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to learn how to make 갈비찜, which is Korean braised beef. Galbi-jjim is typically cooked after marinating in the sauce, but if you don't have the time to marinate overnight, this recipe is for you. I'll put the ingredients and ratios in the description. You want to add one whole bulb of garlic, and if you find minced garlic, you can use that too, but if you're mincing them yourself, make sure to mince it finely or use one of those garlic mincers. I personally like to mince them myself just because it keeps the freshness of garlic, and you can mince it by pressing on them with your knife blades. And now I'm gonna chop them. Chop, 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 chop. And this seems like a lot of work, so maybe you want to put all of the ingredients that I'm going to mention into a mixer and just blend it all together. Now I'm gonna add my sauce. So it starts with soy sauce. Typically I just go by 3 to 4 seconds worth of pouring, but I'll put the specific ratios in the description below. And next I'm going to add some fish sauce, which adds umami flavor to the overall dish. Next up, we're going to add some sweet stuff. Now you can add brown sugar, white sugar. I personally prefer agave syrup, so I'm going to add a bit of that. Swirl that around. Swirl, swirl. Mix, mix. Swirl, swirl. Mix, mix. Next up, now you want to add some gochujang. This is my personal preference, so it adds a bit of spiciness and adds a little kick to the dish, where typically it's only cooked with soy sauce, so that's my personal add. You can add other types of chili if you want for the pepper, but I personally would recommend buying some gochujang from like a local supermarket. And like I said earlier, you can add all of this ingredient for the sauce into a blender and blend it all together. And for anybody watching out for sodium levels, you want to add some water as well to dilute it down, and you can make it still taste good. Now let's get to the harder ingredients. You want to prepare some onions. You can use any types of onions, just not purple onions. And you want to mince them into these chunks, but not too small, not too big. It's really up to you. If you don't want to cry while cutting onions, you can cut the onion in half and run them under water for a few seconds so it gets rid of the spiciness. Otherwise you might end up crying like me here. Next up, potatoes. Here they're somewhat smaller potatoes, but if you have bigger potatoes, make sure you cut them into bigger chunks because you don't want it to end up being as squishy, but I actually personally like them to be crumbly at the final dish, so I'm going to be cutting them smaller than usual. And if you don't like potatoes, you can try replacing them with different types of root vegetables like sweet potatoes or yam. It's just you'll have to change the order or the timing of how long you cook them for. So you can experiment with that as well. lot of potatoes. If it's too much trouble cutting potatoes, you can skip the potatoes. And now if we go to the main ingredient, the short ribs, you want to make sure get it fresh from the butcher or the supermarket. And you can cut this in any chunk. Growing up in the big family, actually, we had to make sure the meat was evenly distributed, so we would cut it in a smaller chunk. But I personally like them thick like this. And bear in mind they will shrink a little bit as you cook, so cut it to your personal one bite size chunks. And there's some additional fat there, but that's what gives it flavor, so you can choose to cut it out or keep it in. I personally will keep it in for flavor. Next, you want to put some olive oil on high heat and put the meat to brown for a little bit. I like cooking with olive oil. Some people prefer butter, some people prefer whatever types of oil, but I think olive oil is my go-to when I cook. As you can see, you want to sear them properly. Make sure to toss them well in sauce. You want to make sure every piece of every side of the beef is covered in sauce, so it marinates as it cooks and it cooks as it marinates. Looks like I didn't mince the garlics thinly enough, but that's okay, it'll cook. We're going to add kiwi actually to the sauce, and I forgot to actually mix it into the sauce in the beginning, but it's essentially to soften the meat. Like I said earlier, you can throw all of this sauce ingredients into a blender and it'll help with spreading and marinating. The point of kiwi is that as you soften the protein particles in the beef, it can actually lead to complete disappearance of beef. So make sure that you don't add too much to proportion. So I typically add 2 kiwi per kilogram of beef. So something to keep in mind when you add kiwi to soften. And I like to peel it before I add it. Some people actually scoop it out with a spoon after they cut it in half, but I think it's just more fun to peel like this. Something I've learned growing up, and I think something that is helpful in your tactile, fine motor skills. And there's one. Now moving on to the second. It's actually fairly healing when you're peeling fruits because you're so concentrated on making sure that 1 centimeter width is kept, and you're going in circles and making it into a nice shape as you peel the fruit. And I think one of those bigger apples, it's one of the most satisfying sensations of peeling fruits. And kiwi is actually that kind of fruit that you don't expect to be that great, but it's so great with high concentration of vitamin C, vitamin K. It's really a super fruit, and I personally like to have a bowl of kiwis cut with banana slices. Catches that tanginess with the sweetness of bananas, and it's a great mixture. Now we're gonna chop it into small chunks. Like I said, just add it to the blender if you have one. I'm just cutting it. I like to cut it with my hands. I'm gonna dice it like this. Chop, 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 chop. And if you don't have kiwis, you can skip this too. It's an additional step, only telling you the basics. So when you add the kiwis in, it's going to help soften the beef, and let it mix and boil for a couple minutes, and it'll help soften the beef at the end. After you boil it for a couple minutes, now we want to add all of the vegetables that we chopped up earlier, onions, potatoes. You can even add broccoli or carrots. Now we're gonna toss this with our spatula. Make sure that they're evenly distributed. I prefer to lift up the beef to the top so the onions get really soft, like really soft, and potatoes where it's completely mushy. That's how I like my potatoes. And now let this boil for 5 to 10 minutes. And you come back to it and it's this beautiful color. And that's it. Put it in a bowl and there you have it. The very basic Korean braised beef.